I'm going to introduce our guest tonight, who is Camilla Jerome. And Camilla uses photography to reclaim her voice in time lost to chronic pain and full body dysfunction. After believing photography had failed her, she now sees similarities between its fluidity and the day-to-day endurance of managing chronic illness. And we're really happy to be welcoming Camilla tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Dale. I'm really excited to be here and to share my work with you. I'm going to go ahead and get started and share my screen. So just give me one moment. Okay.
Perfect.
Great. Thanks, Dale. Okay, so like Dale said, I'm going to be sharing a bit with you about my relationship of photography and chronic illness and how my artistic practice and my health have created a relationship that has grown together. So I started photography in high school around the same time that my chronic pain started. And at the time, my pain went undiagnosed. And it continued to go undiagnosed until about 2 years ago. So for more than half of my life, I was dealing with unanswered questions of things that were happening inside of my body. And as I've made this work and I talk more about it openly, I've learned that there are many women that have experienced, women, non-binary people, trans, who have experienced similar issues within the medical industry. And so while I say that these two things happened when I was in high school, the pain started and I fell into photography, they actually both started so much earlier in my life now that I reflect upon it. I fell in love with photography at a underwater photography exhibit in London. And I was fascinated by what could be illuminated at such depths. I think I was probably about 11 at that time. And now that I look back on some of my health issues, and now that I've been diagnosed, some of my my diseases are genetic. Some of them started from more infectious diseases like Lyme disease, pneumonia, mono, and all of those caused the diseases to progress. So while I was in undergrad, I became fascinated with the ways that families were connected through genetics, what was passed down, and what constitutes a family. And so I started photographing myself, my parents, my siblings, and thinking about kind of what builds a body together. And throughout all of this work, you will see that water is a huge theme. It's also a muse within some of my work as it continues to grow. And again, it comes back with that fluidity of the medium of photography and the fluidity of disability and chronic illness. I like to think about photography because they're even just in the basic elements of developing film, we're using water, we're using liquids. And so just in its basic, first steps of learning photography, we're already using water. And it wasn't until a lot later that I just kept returning to it over and over and over again. So some of this work is kind of early on, some of the things I was thinking about while my parents, both of them, and myself, were all going through illnesses of our own. And photography is still a way that I am able to recognize my feelings. It's definitely a cathartic, it's equal. So I like to say that my practice is self-revelatory. It's always on an emotional edge. It's a form of therapy and it's a form of art in equal parts. So equal parts aesthetic and healing and therapeutic. Um, it's a profound journey inward, looking into myself and then taking what I see inside of me and bringing that out into the light. And there's a level of risk taking which comes forward more in some of my later work. So again, here I'm starting to think about, what are these genetics that kind of tie us together. So this image on my family refer to it as the blondes. None of us are actually this blonde. We all dyed our hair at some point in order to actually become blonde. And so as time went on, I started thinking about whiteness, the accessibility in terms of healthcare, the privilege that I have being a white woman, and how the medical system is then tailored towards whiteness that can also be very blinding. It puts on blinders and it's a very narrow point of view in terms of what health and illness can constitute. I turned to photography in a way that at the time when my chronic pain was undiagnosed, I was using photography as a way to visualize my pain. My conditions weren't showing up on x-rays or MRIs or CAT scans. And so, as Dale said, I started to feel that photography was failing me. Because those diagnostic imaging weren't able to communicate what was happening inside of my body. All the doctors told me that everything was fine, normal, insisted that some of these things were in my head and that I was, I needed more therapy. I had been in therapy for a really long time. And kind of, Dale and I were talking before how like some of this of doctors insisting that it is, part of mental illness contributes to the mental illness that you're already experiencing because of the pain, the isolation, the unknown of what you're feeling and the within your body, the unanswered, and then having doctors insist that that's the way it is. At some point I did start to believe the doctors. I thought for a short time that I was inflicting this pain onto myself because I wasn't seeing answers. And then through photography, I was able to kind of make images that were mirroring what I felt was happening inside of my body. Finding things in nature that were also reflecting back to what I was feeling. And it was a way for me to communicate that the pain was real, that the pain is real, and that all types of pain are real. And so the image on the left I made in 2018, and at the time I had only just heard about endometriosis, which is a full body disorder where tissue similar to the lining of the uterus is found outside of the reproductive system. So it's not the same type of tissue, but it's similar, and it can travel to all parts of the body. It's been found in every organ system, and it starts as early as birth. So the current research believes that you are now born with endometriosis, and it continues to grow throughout your lifetime. So I made this image on the left right as I had a student of mine who told me about her experience with endometriosis. And so the image on the left was how it felt inside my abdomen, um, the pain, the darkness, the kind of the twisting and the oozing. And then 2 years later, I found myself in a position where I was able to uh, have surgery. Endometriosis, again, is a disease that does not show up on diagnostic imaging. The only way to receive a diagnosis is through laparoscopic surgery. So you have to, you have it, and it's considered an elective, which is kind of baffling because I don't know anyone that would say that having surgery for endometriosis would be elective, but it took 2 years from learning about the disease, studying it, and finding the correct doctor who specializes in endometriosis. And so now I'm going to take you. Now we're into grad school. So I went to grad school at the Rhode Island School of Design, and I started in the fall of 2019. And so if anybody remembers the fall of 2019, pretty quickly after that comes the spring of 2020 and the pandemic. So as a chronically ill person, the pandemic definitely had even more of a weight carried with it. I was already familiar with a life of isolation in terms of dealing with some of my symptoms, and but there was an extra level of fear, not knowing what COVID was actually going to do if I became sick, and how that would then propel things forward, knowing that Lyme disease and mono and had already taken such a toll on my health already. I knew that this type of infectious disease was probably not going to be great for me, and so I was confined. My husband and I were living in a 1-bedroom apartment, and I needed to continue to produce work for my graduate degree. And I started thinking about when I teach photography and how I explain photography to my students, people who, whether they're teenagers or adults, young children. I explain to them that the camera is designed off of the eye. It emulates the eye. The aperture is a lot like our pupil. It dilates. You can open it to let more light in, and it closes in order to filter more of the light, to focus the light. The shutter is like a blink, right? We open and close really quickly. So trying to, reference photography back to the body, things that we're already familiar with. Thinking of like the cones and rods in our eyes as the film, our brains as the final print. So thinking about ways that I could connect photography with the body. And I was thinking about how important the eyes are, especially as a visual artist, and even more so as a photographer. It was at the same time that I was doing a lot of research on performance art. And so I, again, went back to the idea of pain and what doctors had advised me to do and not advised me to do. So thinking of my greatest assets, my eyes, I sat in a window in the sun, and I stared into the sun until my body was completely consumed by the shadow. And so then this level of risk taking, the idea would be that the sun would damage my eyes. But it was actually the act of sitting there for that amount of time that did more damage. I find that my work can be is a meditative process. A lot of I hope this loads. There we go. Um, so I originally learned to meditate because of the pain that I was experiencing, as a way to quiet myself, as a way to redirect my attention, um, to acknowledge pain and then redirect. And that continues to show up throughout my work. Um, so I envision this work to be projected on a large scale, where just the bust of my body is the same height as myself. I'm a fairly tall woman. I'm 6 feet tall, and the idea is that pain is not something to be hidden. It is something that can be seen and shared. And by monumentalizing my pain, I'm honoring it, and opening these avenues may be slightly masochistic, and by slightly, I mean it probably is. And but it's a validation and acknowledging my pain that gives me pleasure in terms of sharing and opening conversation with other people. The whole performance is an hour long. Um, and let's and so this putting myself on a stage, performing my pain, is in direct opposition of the performance of acting healthy in my everyday life, of pretending that I'm not in pain, or belittling or masking the pain that I really feel, in term so that other people don't feel uncomfortable. Um, there is an idea that some of these illnesses are quote unquote invisible, um, because they're not readily available, to be seen. But most of what happens that is visible, seemingly invisible, is because they happen in private. They happen at home. They happen in spaces where I I choose not to go out and not to be seen. And those are in the ways that the pain can be managed. Um, Another thing with photography, we talk a lot about light and time. And so I'm thinking about time spent waiting. Um, the time waiting to feel relief, the time waiting to see a doctor, the time waiting in a waiting room, in the exam room, waiting for to get the test, waiting for the test results, waiting for medication, waiting on insurance. And the perception of time, seconds can feel like minutes and hours can feel like days. um, Days can feel like weeks, but then there are weeks that feel like they disappear, years that feel like fleeting moments. So the full performance can be found on my website, but I'm going to move along. So I'm going to kind of shift a little bit into some of my other works and some of my inspirations. So Liz Deschennes, I was fortunate enough to see her speak at Brown, and she was talking about her work in reference to working with a collector, and she had sold the work to the collector, and the collector came back and wanted to return the work. And when she asked why, they said because it had changed, the colors had changed, and it was no longer the same work that they had originally bought. And she took it right back, gave them her money back, didn't give them a new piece. And she said, that's the point of my work, is that my work changes, that it changes based off of the installation and where I'm showing the work, that there can be handprints from the installation process. And it got me thinking about the way that her work in particular, has a life of its own, similar to the body's, ever changing. And I found that really fascinating, that it wasn't supposed to be this one moment fixed in time, that it at one point was something, and it continues to change into something else. So I had made this photograph as a part of my body of work called Anhedonia. So Anhedonia was during the time where I was making work about my chronic pain and its relationship to pain and pleasure, and its relationship to depression. So anhedonia is the inability to feel pleasure, which is often how depression can be described. I was getting ready for my first solo show, and I had all of these prints in my home at the beginning of the pandemic. And of course, the show was canceled. And I had all of this work in kind of a fit of rage and not knowing really what else to do. I took these prints, and one after one, they went into my bathtub, and I poured bleach on them. It was probably about 15 images in various sizes, and only one came out in a final form that felt that felt right. I don't know. I feel like we as artists kind of just know when there's something, when we get that thing. We don't necessarily know what we're looking for, but when we see it, we know that's what it is. And in this process, pouring bleach and letting it sit there, I wasn't able to see what was happening in that time until I washed the print. Very similar to some of the other processes in photography, of not knowing what you're going to get until you start developing and processing. And so we had so much bleach at home because we were cleaning everything. We were all wiping down groceries, and we were rationing bleach. Everyone needed it. And so I was very particular on how much bleach I used per print. And this was the outcome, which this work still smells like bleach. It does change. It continues to lighten. And I think I should probably re-photograph it, because at this point it's going to look a lot different than it does now on the screen. And so this moment really changed the way that I was making work. I was making work out of my bathtub, which is the same place that I go for relief. The place where I cling on to warm water and comfort in the same way that I'm, washing these prints with attention and detail. So the place that I was going to heal was in the same place that I was making work. So here are some details, the way that the colors shift, the way that, the ink was being lifted off of the page. And at this point, I also became really fascinated with this single unique object, something that's not reproducible unless it's rephotographed. But unlike film, I can't make multiple prints. I can't have an edition. It's an edition of one. They are unique pieces in the same way that I think that every person with chronic illness and disability has a unique experience. No one, chronic illness, it's not a monolith. Everybody has their own journey, their own experience based off of where they come from, their access to healthcare, the color of their skin, their gender identity, their sexual identity. And with all of that comes its own barriers. The great thing about the pandemic was that work was really accessible online. And I found this work by Finnegan Shannon, and they were creating these furniture pieces, and it put into words perfectly about how I felt going to look at art in a museum setting, potentially sometimes even going to multiple galleries. I'm thinking about going to New York and walking through Chelsea and being so exhausted that I'm too tired to look at work. And at the same time, I was thinking about my father. And when my father would come to my show openings, I would always make sure there was a chair for him. He had a spinal fusion surgery, and so standing for long periods of time was really difficult for him. And at this point in my life, the same things are starting to happen to me, that standing for long periods of time is doing more harm than actually being able to enjoy the experience of being and looking at art. And so this exhibition has asked me to stand for too long, sit if you agree, is a beautiful invitation to rest, in order to give someone a place for respite. And at this time, I really started thinking about the color blue and why Finnegan Shannon had chosen to make these benches blue. Why was I starting to be drawn to the color blue? And at the same time, I was starting to heavily identify with being disabled. And I started recognizing disability access signs are all blue. So thinking about accessible parking or automatic door buttons, they're blue, and in this like painter's tape blue. And it really revolutionized the way that I was thinking about my artistic practice. And thank goodness I had cyanotype chemicals at home with me, and I was able to start working with cyanotype. So I started doing walking studies. So I would take 6 feet of canvas, the same height as my body, and I would put it on different surfaces. I would dip my feet in cyanotype emulsion, and I would walk for 15 minutes. I don't recommend you do this at home. My feet did turn blue. but I do know that cyanotype is one of the safest photographic processes. And so going back to that level of risk taking, this level of performance, I was documenting the process of making and then risking the idea that some of these chemicals were going into my body. It felt like an okay risk, thinking about some of the medications, some of the contrast dyes that had already been injected. I was okay doing some of those things. So for the sake of art, why would it be potentially any different? And so from the walking studies came these, impressions. At the time, I was mixing cyanotype with my bath water. And so I would take a bath. At the end of the bath, I would collect it in a mason jar. I would collect the water. Then I would mix my cyanotype with the bath water, and it started to give me a variation of blues. And so at this time was when I started realizing that I had control, not quite sure how I was controlling it at the time, but I could change the hue, I could change the saturation of cyanotype. And so these are walking studies from the previous videos on grass and pavement. And then this started bringing me back to my fascination with Ana Mendieta. I was fortunate enough to see an exhibition at Gropius Bau in Berlin when I was teaching with Northeastern, and they had all of her Silhouette series videos. And I stumbled upon it by accident. I was going to the museum to see something else, and I spent hours just watching these videos over in loops. And these are the ones that really stuck with me. The one on the left, the film, all the films are silent, but I can hear the water when I watch this film. I can feel the discomfort of her holding her head above the water. On the right, these photographs were there. I can see her digging and creating these outlines of her body within the sand. And so I was thinking of different ways in which I can represent the body outside of the traditional rectangle, outside of the traditional frame that we think photography exists within these four borders. And so I created another walking study, and this walking study was on mud. And so the actual footprints aren't as legible as pavement or grass. But this walking study was different. The cyanotype permeated through the canvas, and I was able to expose both sides. There were pieces of sticks and mud that that dictated the composition over just the actual footprints and the printmaking of walking. And so this installation, I tried so hard to keep it all together, is a reference to also my own unraveling. So this is unraveled by hand, the edges. Spent 30 hours unraveling the edges of the canvas, which ultimately led to lots of muscle spasms in my hands, aggravated some of my nerve pain. It was, again, a risk-taking performance, I guess kind of playing on that, masochistic, I know that this isn't good for me, but it's for the art. It's also very therapeutic. Um, and at the same time, I was also thinking about how narcissistic it is of me to be making work that's all about me and my own existence. And so I was thinking about the story of Narcissus and gazing at himself into a reflecting pool, and so in love with his own reflection that he fell in and drowned. And so I asked someone, and they made me a large mirror of 84 inches by 32 inches, and I had someone build a platform to elevate it. And I used a white frame as thinking about the conventional borders, thinking about whiteness and the structures that uphold certain frameworks within our society. The canvas is in reference to that of a hide, of skin, of body falling away from some of that, like that white cube, thinking about that white frame and falling into something else, and whether that's falling into yourself, and giving in, and so kind of thinking about where that fine line is. Here's some details. And so the canvas is hung by pieces of itself. So as I unraveled, I saved all the pieces, all the threads and the yarn that I pulled out. And on the right side, you can see that there are chunks that I saved, and I tied them all together. There is that one piece that breaks the surface tension with the mirror of the reflection. And it's all connected to the frame by its own threads. So this is another installation. Someone once told me, you can see yourself clearest in the dark. This is built off of data that I recorded in October of 2019. As a part of some of my illnesses, there is insomnia and hypersomnia, and I was thinking about the importance of sleep in reference to health. Some of my classes, I was in grad school, I was there with some undergrads, and it was fascinating listening to undergrads almost compete for how little sleep they got the night before. That somehow that the less they slept, the more successful they would be, or the less they slept, they worked the hardest. And I became really interested in this idea of sleep and its relationship to capitalism, the lack of sleep, the grind, how being awake is the only time that you are actually worth something. And so there's only 13 strands in this sleep study because I only slept 13 days or nights within that time. So each strand represents one night of sleep, and each square represents 1 hour. So this cyanotype is printed on cotton bed sheets, and they're 4x5 contact prints, using a wooden pinhole camera with an aperture of 256, so it's teeny tiny, allowed me to get these really, really long exposures. And so I was able to photograph myself sleeping at night, taking exposures of various parts of my bedroom, and creating these contact prints from that one negative. So here there's 13 separate photographs. On the left side, you can see that there's it's my bedside lamp. And so that whole strand is the same print printed over and over and over again. On the right-hand side is a self-portrait upon waking. Um, Thinking about the way that information is handled throughout the medical system, I was thinking about the number of times my name and date of birth have been written and recorded, but there's no picture of me, of what I look like, and my identifiable factors are just numbers and letters. And so I made a portrait, and I decided to print it on just a regular, grayscale printer. And I printed it. The first time I printed it, I was a ghost. You couldn't see anything. And so I printed the same photograph over and over and over again on one sheet of paper until I got this final product where my eyes are hollow. Um, It shows the repetitiveness of what it's like to seek a diagnosis, or the moment where you actually get diagnosed, and is it a relief um, or is it not what you had hoped for? Some people say, well, if you're not diagnosed, that's a good thing. And why would you want a diagnosis? But I can tell you now that in the last 2 years that I've actually been diagnosed, I've learned more about myself than I have my entire life. I now understand myself so much better. And so at the same time, I was studying the work of Emily Dickinson. And Emily Dickinson is also from Massachusetts, um, a poet who was always looked at as other. Um, she experienced a lot of her own health issues, believed to have a form of epilepsy. Now looking back at some of her health records, but she also lived in isolation because she was unmarried, because she was an artist. She lived in isolation and was allowed to write, which is a privilege, to be able to live in that kind of way and be able to express yourself. Um, so I was thinking a lot about Emily and her own relationship to health. She created these series of poems where she bound the books herself with red thread, and she called them fascicles. And what I find fascinating is that fascicles is also a word that relates back to the body in terms of clumps of connective tissue. And at this point is when I learned and I got my diagnosis of I have a genetic disorder known as Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I have the hypermobile type. There's currently 13 subtypes to the syndrome. This one, hypermobility, is not able to be seen on diagnostic imaging, can't be tested on blood work. And one of the criteria for diagnosis is process of elimination for a lot of other diseases, like autoimmunity of MS, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis. All of those things need to be ruled out, and that is a process of becoming diagnosed. And so I started using the same portrait and applying it in different methods. So I was thinking about waiting, like I was talking about earlier, and the idea of being a patient. So the waiting and and seeing yourself and not seeing yourself, of being invisible and being present. And this installation is not complete without the other, because you can see yourself through various levels. So the reflection, again, relating back to the earlier installation of the walking study on mud, and using the same self-portrait in different applications. And so I also applied it to shells. I'm very fortunate enough that I currently live in the smallest town in Massachusetts. It's a small town, 1 square mile, called Nahant. Um, Nahant is the indigenous name of the land, and it's connected. So it's technically an island connected to the mainland by the sandbar, which now has a man-made causeway over it. And so this idea of water, being surrounded by water, took on a whole other form. And I was collecting shells all the time, shells, sea glass, and I knew that cyanotype could be printed on any natural material. And so I started seeing what I could do by using digital negatives and printing with cyanotype on found seashells. So again, you can see in the larger shell, it's the same portrait from the previous slides. The bottom shell again, and the eyes are cut out from the same portrait over and over again. And so these are all found oyster shells, thinking about, you know, life is an oyster. So, you know, the pearl within it, and, you know, this is newer work. And I'm excited to kind of see where it takes me. I've also was lucky enough to find this like very, very large piece of sea glass that I'm really hesitant to use because I don't want to ruin it with the wrong picture. And so there's always this like, you know, level of self-doubt. But I'll do it, I promise. And so this led me to my current body of work, which is titled after an Emily Dickinson poem, An Hour is the Sea. And I'm using cyanotype, ocean water, salt, seaweed, sand, and I'm out in my yard after collecting all of these, and I'm pouring the cyanotype and mixing it with the, you know, I'll do one pour of cyanotype and then I'll do another pour of ocean water and then more cyanotype and sprinkle salt, and then this all is happening as it's exposing. And so from the time that I was doing the walking studies and I realized that I could manipulate the colors and the densities and the shades of blue, it's taken me 3 years to actually find out why and how I can get these green and yellow and light and dark blue tones by a photographic / painting process. And so this is, again, a really, really meditative process. You have to be very present while making the work, and you have to just respond to the way that the emulsion hits the paper, the strength of the sun and the UV light, and how quick things are drying and exposing. When it's windy, things dry a lot faster versus when it's not windy. And so now I'm starting to scale up. This is a larger piece and a diptych. This is made with soap and salt water, large pieces of ancient mineral salts, which is the same salts that I use for my healing baths. And this process has been really, really freeing, and I'm really enjoying making this work. And I feel like that is a part of why I've always turned to photography, is because the actual act of making it brings me so much joy, and that is the counterbalance to some of the the endurance of chronic illness and managing chronic illness, a form of expression that I have good days and I have bad days. You see me on the good days, and I'm usually at home, inside, or in bed on my bad days. I make work on my good days. And so all of these have been made on my good days, where I have to make this work, where I feel drawn to get something out and to feel connected on a different way of making work than I ever have before. And so I am at the end of my talk, but I just wanted to, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, as well as Ehlers-Danlos Awareness Month. And so I'm sure many of us know people who struggle with their mental health in the past, or we have friends that reach out to us more than we reach out to them. And I encourage you to reach out to anyone that you know that has struggled in the past, that has had health issues that they've mentioned in passing. Maybe they're a caregiver for someone else who is ill. So reach out. It means the world, even if they don't respond, but to know that someone is thinking of them, they'll feel less alone. So thank you all for coming. And I think we have a little bit time for Q&A.
Yeah, thank you, Camilla.
Yeah.
That was really, it was interesting to see your journey and all kind of the stops you made along it, because I was familiar with your cyanotype work, so to see everything else that kind of led up to that was really interesting. And that video was so incredibly powerful.
Thanks.
Yep. If anybody has questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can use the raise hand function, and then I can let you turn on your mic. Also, we get a transcript of the chat, so if you want to share anything, it doesn't have to be a question, but a comment, something that you'd like Camilla to see after the fact, I'll download the transcript and share it with her, transcript of the chat. So feel free to put things in there that are not questions, as well as questions. Technically, I had a technical question about the work that you're doing on shells and on the sea glass. Are you treating the object that you're printing on with anything before you're applying the cyanotype emulsion?
Yeah, I am treating it with a very watered down Mod Podge.
That's much.
Yeah, just I had it and I was like, might as well give it a try. And so it just allows something in order to like have it grab and not just completely like permeate. I've tried printing on wood in the past or rocks, and it just like sinks right through the medium. And so yeah, just having like a little bit of just a little bit of a barrier helps it to hold on to something. Yeah.
Cool. Jessica put a comment in there that your work was lovely, and it's great seeing you push through the pain and depression, as this can be a really hard time to want to create. So you were also commenting on how like you're creating on your good days. Have you ever tried to create on your bad days, and how does that work or not work?
Yeah. I mean, there are times where I definitely feel the urge to create on bad days. Sometimes it'll help, kind of draw my attention elsewhere, not focus so much on the bodily pain. And and sometimes it helps me, think about, I have a certain idea, and it evolves. It's not always the original idea is the final piece. And I've just come to learn that especially receiving diagnoses, and um, that on the bad days, if I push too hard, um, the bad days can be prolonged.
Mm.
And so it takes longer to recover. And so again, it's just that awareness and attention to self, um, that allows different energy to show up in the work.
Catherine put in the comments that she really enjoyed listening to you be so open about your struggles. So I think that's another important aspect, is just you were talking about kind of hiding versus like what's the public facing versus the private.
Mm-hmm.
That goes back to like your good and bad days, but being able to take those bad days but also making them public and being open about it, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think that, there's just, it's really remarkable once you start looking at the statistics of the amount of people, especially in the US, that experience chronic pain. I think it's like 1 in 5 people. So, I mean, we all know someone that experiences chronic pain. Um, whether you know it or not, it's like, and I think that's one of the things that really baffles the medical system, is that people with chronic pain are really, really good at hiding it, because we
Mm.
have to, in order to continue to go to work, to get hired at jobs, in order to have social lives. To a certain extent, you kind of just have to push through. And at some point, the pushing through is doing more damage than keeping it all to yourself. And I think it's really important that we start to have more conversations um, about what we're experiencing, whether it's mental or physical pain, in order to, to find connections. I mean, the only, you know, when I got sick, I lost a lot of friends.
Mm.
And it became really isolating, and it's really hard for people to understand. My family has been incredibly supportive. My husband is really supportive. Um, but I've found so many people, just because I'm open and talking about it, that people will then, kind of come to me and talk, and now we're friends, like before
Mm.
we wouldn't have had that connection. Um, but now we can lean on one another.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, I feel like at least in this country, it's a change of kind of the mentality where you used to have to be tough and just power through, but people are talking about more health and mental health. Um, I think especially younger people are more comfortable talking about that stuff now,
yeah.
which is interesting. So hopefully there's kind of a transformation going on where people don't feel the need to just,
Go it alone.
yeah, or
Yeah.
hide what they're going
Yeah.
through.
Yeah.
Linda put in the chat um, that she finds your cyanide processes really interesting as a way of expressing how you feel. And then Catherine says she agrees that it's really special if you're lucky to connect with someone. How have you found community, or have you, specific to like the community of people dealing with chronic pain? Like, are there resources, or were they just people in your life already that you guys didn't realize that you had something in common? How have you made the connections that you have?
Um, a lot of it is over the internet. It's really accessible for people with chronic illness and disability. Um, there's a really wonderful community of artists, and other photographers that are also, expressing themselves through, making our experiences visual, visualizing what we've experienced. Um, I would say it's more a matter of like, I have, you know, I have a love-hate relationship with Facebook, but it's really, really great for finding support groups and spreading information. Um, and so I've met a lot of people that way of, of sharing work via, social media. And so I would say there's only like a few people that I already knew. Um, but it's more of people that I've found by being open with my work and people making some not the same, but talking about similar things and expressing ourselves through art.
Yeah, so another benefit of putting yourself out there is finding community,
Yeah,
and then that makes
and
it so you don't have to go it alone.
yeah, and I find it really interesting. Like I teach at colleges in Boston, and this last semester, I had two students in my class, and their final projects were about their own relationship with chronic illness
Mm.
and creating projects on, um, you know, one person made a website and made portraits of people and telling their stories, and it was I don't know if they would have made that work had they not felt like it was a safe place to start trying to share some of those stories,
Mhm.
um, and have someone that maybe gets it and to talk through it, see someone that is a little bit more ahead, further along in life, that's figuring it out and making it work, but um, not hiding it. I mean, my it's all over like social media and my website, and so if you know me and we're connected in any way, you'll be able to see and hear and listen to me talk about some of the things that I've experienced and some of the things that are ongoing. um and yeah, I think just being open about it is like some of these my students are feeling less like they have to keep it all to themselves.
Mm,
Yeah.
that's great. We have a couple other things in the chat. Jessica said that she loved your series where you're looking at your family as well. And then Tab says, running late. They're wondering if you had to navigate things like consistency or deadlines, or the expectations of consistency slash deadlines while trying to honor your process. I'm thinking about the struggle to use our art as a place to express and heal while still operating in an ableist society.
Yeah. It's definitely difficult. I mean, there are still deadlines. I was very open with professors and open with people that I, work with now outside of grad school. One of the things about the cyanotype process and the way that I use it is that you can use a UV light box within a dark room. The importance to me is actually using the sun as like a kind of an important um, you know relationship between the work and the healing process, and thinking about the performance video, and so yeah, I mean, I do base my work around the weather, and kind of plan accordingly. I try and look at like a week ahead and kind of plan around other work and doctor's appointments and things like that, and um try and rest for those. It's all a balancing act.
Mm.
um I was getting ready for a show last week and it was really hard. It's still trying to meet the deadline and trying to be present out of things that I don't really like flow with my everyday schedule. um and it's different for every person, and so I don't think that I truly believe that I don't think I'd be able I would have finished grad school had I not had the online option during the pandemic. It was, and I still advocate for it, that there should always be an online option at every university and at every college, because we just proved that every single school can do it. And so whether you're there physically or on a screen, your presence is important no matter what. And, you know, a lot of the things that the disability and chronic illness community have been asking for all happened because the masses and the other people, able-bodied people, the people who have yet to become disabled, all needed in terms of access. So we needed to work from home. Look at that. Now everyone can work from home. But, 4 years ago when I was requesting work from home, it wasn't an option.
Mm.
So, I think that in some ways, we have a little bit more, some more tools in our belt to kind of prove that we can do the work, that these accommodations can happen. I generally like to ask for some, like, thinking about deadlines. I am, my mother can tell you I am the biggest procrastinator. I wait until day of, and it's when I make my best work. I've tried other ways and it just it just doesn't, I just am not the same. I don't produce the same. And so, like, knowing that about myself is helpful in terms of just planning around when my deadlines are, that I have a big final push of adrenaline and cortisol that, like, gets me over the finish line. I'm getting a little bit better at planning ahead, but yeah, I think it's also just like I ask for, like, hard deadlines and soft deadlines, right? So it's like, can I float something by you 2 or 3 weeks in advance? Like, when do you absolutely need it by? If, like, something's going to press or whatever, like, when is the last possible date I can get it to you? Okay, I'm gonna plan for this day. It's, I think it's still a struggle. I mean, it is an ableist society and we are the minorities, and we are, and I think just working together, working with, you know, hopefully having a really supportive manager in some of these instances, having good communication. But it's not easy to navigate. No, I wouldn't say that.
Yeah, I would say, like, probably with a lot of things in life, what you just said, communication is key.
Yeah. Yeah. Or sometimes it's like they give me a deadline and I know that that deadline's a little too late in terms of some of the things I already have planned. And so maybe I try and move up to the deadline, so that, I meet it ahead of time. And then, and then if things happen and kind of, get in the way or delay something, I have time to kind of to circle back, I guess. Um, yeah.
All right. If anybody has any other questions, comments, put them in the chat. I'll share the transcript, like I mentioned, with Camilla, so comments are welcome as well. And if nobody has any other questions, comments, then I'd like to thank you, Camilla, for taking your time out tonight and meeting with us.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much for having me.
Yeah, no, it was wonderful. It was great to see, like I said before, the whole scope and, like, the
Yeah.
progression of your work.
Hmm.
And then thanks for everybody who came and joined us. Like I mentioned at the beginning, check our website for upcoming talks if you're not local. Ella Morton is our next speaker on June 5th. And just keep an eye on that page. If you are local, our current exhibition is up through the end of the month. You can make an appointment to see it online, and then also check out the website for in-person workshops that are coming up as well, and get in touch to use a darkroom if you're looking for a place to print. And with that, good night, everybody, and thanks again, Camilla.
Yeah, thank you all for listening.